Welcome, I'm delighted to see hardly an empty seat in the place. Excellent. I'm going to hand straight over to our chair. You don't need two chairmen for today. Delighted to say Michael Hibbs from Shakespeare Martineau has joined us as our chair, and he'll introduce the panel. Enjoy.
So welcome to what we're being told is the most important decision of a generation. And the demographics of this audience, with maybe 2/3 of you being students, according to the polls, we're told that you are less likely to turn out and actually vote in 4 weeks' time. So we'll see as we go on how you're thinking about things at the moment. We have an eminent panel today. We have Sir Albert Bohr to my right, probably the best-known nuclear physicist in Birmingham, but not for that reason, because he was Labour leader of Birmingham City Council for 2 spells, ending in December last year. He presided over much of the regeneration of Birmingham from Bullring to Symphony Hall. He was, and is still, I think, a member of the EU Committee on the Regions and has been that since 1992, I think. To his right is Sir Philip. Is Philip not yet? No. Philip Bushell-Matthews, who is former managing director of Red Mill, has been a Conservative MEP for 20 years, ending in 2009.
10 years.
10 years. Oh, right. Okay, for 10 years. 20, my information was wrong. Helped preserve the UK opt-out from the Working Time Directive, the author of 2 books, The Gravy Train and Who Rules Britannia, and I think no doubt he'll tell you that he's bringing another book out fairly shortly. To my left, Bill Good is a mechanical engineer and chartered accountant, MD at the TI Group for many years until that was sold to Sandvik. And then he did that amazing thing of being able to continue with Sandvik running that business for 13 years afterwards. In more recent years, buying and selling companies, and amongst many other roles is non-executive director of the Assay Office and the Botanic Gardens in Birmingham. And to his left, Brian Tustane, former chief executive of the Association of Vending Services until 2011. He's now, I think, still director of the European Vending Association, and he's chairman of Stratford-on-Avon Conservatives. Your panel for this session.
And may I add, I am alumni as well.
An alumni of here, yes, absolutely. Before we get underway, what we're going to do is that we're going to take some questions that have been handed in beforehand, and then we'll probably give you the opportunity, if we get the chance in terms of the time, to make comments and add your voice. But before we get underway, each of the speakers will have a few moments, perhaps 5 minutes maximum, just to say something about their views on this referendum as it's coming up. So first of all, before that, I'd like to take a vote just to see where you are at the moment. Now, I know you've got some cards and things, but because there's been such a good turnout, there aren't enough cards for everyone. So I'm going to ask you to do it by show of hands instead, please. So there are 3 ways I imagine that all of you will vote. Either that you want to stay in the EU, or that you want to leave, or that you haven't yet made up your mind. So we'll take them in that order, please. So those of you who would like to stay in the EU, please raise your hands. Okay. And could you put those down? And then let's have a look at those who would like to leave, the Brexiteers. Okay, slightly smaller number there. And finally, those of you who haven't made up your mind yet. Okay, there's a significant proportion of the audience still to make up their mind. At the end, we'll see whether you've changed your mind, not which way you've changed your mind, but whether you've changed your minds over this. So now I'm going to invite each of our speakers to say something about their views on this situation. At the moment, I'm going to invite Philip to go first then. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. If I may, I will talk very much about the economy, the business aspects of the EU, because that's my background, as has been said. Because I'm so old, I spent 35 years in the food business, about 25 years at director level, running businesses in the Netherlands and in Portugal, as well as various parts of the UK. I was the director of Bird's Eye Walls and then Vandenberg's, and then I ran a food service business, part of Vandenberg. So it's all been in the food business, an issue very close to my heart, and I guess perhaps to some of yours. When I was selected by the party to become a candidate as MEP, the Daily Telegraph, true to form, tried to pigeonhole all the candidates, Eurosceptic, Europhile, Eurosceptic. And when it came to me, they put businessman. And I was very happy with that because I didn't have any great, and don't have any great, political ideology. I don't believe in abstracts and sound bites. I believe in what works. I believe in facts and what delivers for Britain, what delivers for jobs. But was delighted to have the opportunity to become an MEP. I'm passionate about EU membership. I was passionate about the work I did as a West Midlands MEP for 10 years. And I learnt a lot the moment I got there about why we joined the EU. Because if you think about it, Brexit is not a new idea. It was an old idea when we chose not to Brenter, if you're with me. We chose to stay out because we were a leading member of the European Free Trade Association. We had a treaty with this new EU. We said we're big enough and brave enough and bold enough to go on our own. We don't need to join this new bureaucratic outfit because we will get free trade. Lack of Brenter showed we didn't get free trade, so we then chose to sign up, and I realised why, as I say, when I got there. I was involved with two particular issues within the first few months. One was the chocolate directive. I was amazed to find that Cadbury's Dairy Milk and other dairy milk products, although we'd been a member of the EU for 20 years, hadn't been agreed to be sold in all EU member states because they wouldn't call it chocolate. It wasn't Belgian, it wasn't dark, etc., etc., etc. So we had to shape legislation that would get chocolate agreed. It was all about making rules at EU level to open up more trade, not about tariffs, but about rules. A later issue was, a few months later, BSE struck, sadly, a lot of this country. The French used that opportunity to ban purchases of British beef, even though all the health authorities said it was safe to eat. And I realised then that all the other countries, although they're important trading partners, they're also trading competitors with their own agendas. And so a few of us decided to march on Paris. And we actually stood, it was a little stunt at the Étoile, and we had big signs saying, Marie Antoinette said, let them eat cake. British Conservative MEPs say, let them eat British beef. And it got a lot of acclamations through the press. And a few weeks afterwards, the British government took France to the European Court of Justice, and they ruled in our favour, and they had to take British beef. And that was a reminder to me that the European Court of Justice doesn't impose laws upon us, it reinforces and respects the laws that we've all signed up to in the first place. So they're on side. The final thing I would like to say is that I agree with half the campaign slogan of the Leavers. They say we should make our own rules, control our own destiny. I believe that we should do as much as we can to control our own destiny, but making our rules doesn't deliver it. If I could use an F word, it's a fantasy. I don't believe in fantasy, I believe in facts. If you're not at the table, you end up on the menu. The world is a very complicated place. It's getting more and more difficult, and I can understand that people genuinely, I'm not trying to mock them, genuinely want to stop the world and get off. You can always get off, but you won't stop the world. It will move on. We need to be there and help to shape it to our advantage. My final shot is, please can the camera focus on my tie. It's the reminder that the EU is made up of member states. It's member states who set the rules. Long may that remain. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bill.
Oh, right. OK. We've jumped the order there. Right. I'm also going to be talking about trade. I'm going to be talking about immigration. But first of all, what you're about to be making is the most important decision that you are likely to make in your lifetime on this vote. As a Vote Leave person, we're not anti-European at all. We actually like European. We like Europe. What we don't like is the bureaucracy and the EU legislation that actually comes there. Just bear in mind, a lot of you are intending to vote Remain. Just bear in mind, you're not voting for the status quo. You are looking here at an integrated Europe, one that actually wants to get ever closer union. If you believe in the United States of Europe, in which we're part of, then fair enough, I certainly don't. But beware, That's where it's going. If you want to be a member of a club, but you don't actually want to follow the rules or be part of the central part of it, I question why you should be a member of the club at all. 40 years we've been trying to reform the EU, and actually it's not. There's a few examples where we've actually made an influence, but they are few and far between. So we really have an issue with Europe. The EU, as you're well aware, is headed up by unelected, and often, exception to politicians here, but failed politicians, right? Who are actually overseen and making legislation that we then have to abide by, not by your elected representatives. Let me move on to trade, right? If you actually look around the world and you look at, over periods of time, doesn't matter where or when, those economies that prosper because they have the least intervention from government. Businessmen and businesswomen, the entrepreneurs, are able to get out there and do the business, uninterrupted, unfettered. Yes, we need some rules and regulations. I'm not saying we want no rules and regulations. A lot of you in the food industry, we need some rules and regulations. But they need to be sensible and they need to be appropriate, and we need to ensure that our civil servants are accountable to our politicians. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. I'm not looking at a little England situation. I want to trade with the world. Europe isn't the world. It's inward looking. The trade with Europe has gone down. It was 55% of our exports. It's now only 45%. It's getting less. Europe is bureaucratic, inefficient, unproductive. The world is actually moving on. It's leaving Europe behind. You're looking out at sort of China, India, South America, Africa. That's where the world's moving. It's certainly moving east. I work with the Chinese heavily. So I'm not looking at a little England. Trade. People talk about sort of, we're worried about having trade agreements. Well, good grief, the EU hasn't got a trade agreement with most countries, with America, with India. It's been trying to negotiate a trade agreement with India since 2007. But you try and get 28 countries to agree to something, you end up with the lowest common denominator. It's bureaucratic, takes a long time, and hey-ho, the other side becomes bureaucratic, takes a long time, and you don't get there. We're able to actually negotiate our own trade agreements over a period of time and actually get what we want in this country. We are great traders. We're free traders. We trade with the world openly. We encourage it. We're being prevented from that. And it's costing us money because those trade deals haven't been agreed. We can actually do it better and quicker. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. We're the most innovative country in the world per head of population. We produce things, we actually bring about new inventions. Rules and regulations prevents us from that enterprise spirit. It clamps down. It's burdening on us. I mean, the rules and regulations and the independent think tank, Open Europe, and it's totally independent, but they calculated that EU red tape costs £600 million per week to UK businesses. Now, some of that, I'm absolutely sure, is required, but by no means all of it. Immigration. Let me move on to immigration, because it's a real big point. At the moment, we are not able to control people from Europe at all. Anybody with a European passport, forged or not, criminal or not, with serious illnesses or not, can actually come to this country. Now, this country has always lived and worked with immigrants. We actually want them. They're fantastic. They do marvellous things to our economy. So I'm not anti-immigration at all. But what an unfair world when actually anybody from Europe can come in here, but we actually then restrict, because actually we can't have too many people coming into this country, we therefore restrict those countries from the Commonwealth, from India, from China, from America. So there's tight immigration controls on areas actually where possibly they have our culture, they possibly speak our language, where we've actually got the skills that we want. What was it, 4/5 of all new jobs have actually been taken by local immigrant labour from Europe coming in? I want a fair world. I want one that we're in control of. You've had a lot in the media of scare, of, oh, well, don't change, don't change, don't change. Now I put it to you. You are at the moment effectively like a frog in water, and somebody has put the heat on. And it's getting hotter and hotter. And I don't know if you know, but you actually effectively boil a frog alive by doing that, because the frog sits in there, it thinks it's very nice and it's warm, and actually it's a bit difficult to jump out, and actually I'm quite okay here. And then when it's too hot, he can't jump out. We are at a point where we are able to jump out. We need to make that jump. We need to make that change. We're strong enough as an economy to do it. And it's your future that I'm looking at. Thank you.
Sir Albert.
Well, I agree with one thing that Bill has just said. It is one of the most important decisions that any of us will have to take in our lifetime. But equally, I would put it a slightly different way. It's going to be the gamble of our lifetime if the vote goes for exit. Because we do not comprehend, we do not understand what it is we will replace the European Union with, and we will have to replace it with something. We may be the 5th largest economy in the world. And yes, just under 50% of our exports go to the EU. But if we're talking about trade balance, only 10% of our imports come from the EU. And I think we ought to be rather concerned about what might happen on the 24th of June 2018. Remember the date. Because we will lose access to the European market. The regulations currently mean that we will switch off that access to the European market on the 24th of June 2018, 2 years after a no vote. Of course, that period can be extended and will need to be extended, because there is no way we will be able to put together a trade deal with the 27 member states in that 2-year period to the 24th of June 2018. So I think the economy of this country is at risk, and that's the gamble that we are perhaps being asked to take. In this region, car making, high-tech industry, financial services, we're as reliant on those in this region as the UK is reliant on those sectors. In terms of this region, 67% of manufacturing jobs in the West Midlands are linked to exports to the EU. 67% of our jobs are therefore perhaps in jeopardy if there is a no vote. And I can say to you that the renaissance of Birmingham, the diversification of the economy of this city, has been geared or supported by the EU. When we took the decision to build the convention centre, the UK government were not around. Where did the money come from? It came from Europe in the main. And Europe have helped us in diversifying that, the likes of the Ashton Science Park, the Birmingham Research Park, and much more. What do we gain from a net contribution to the EU budget? A discussion I had with Gordon Brown some years ago when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, when he was arguing with the position I was taking over the EU budget for 2007-2012. We agreed to differ. But my point was, a negotiation with the EU meant that we had a 7-year horizon on budget spend. 7 years to plan and put in place new initiatives for this city and this region. You cannot get that through the British government, whatever that British government political colour is. But there are challenges coming. Challenges of climate change, migration, etc. And let me hit on the head this issue about unelected legislators. The civil service equivalent in Europe is the Commission. The Commission are in effect the civil servants. Decisions are not taken by the European Commission. Decisions are now increasingly taken on a joint basis with the European Parliament on co-decision making and the member state prime ministers or ministers. So decisions actually are at a member state level or at a national or a European elected level in terms of the European Parliament. And we should remember that. Actually, it's quite easy to influence those processes because the European process is a very open book one, and it's an engagement that I have a great deal of the time. So, what are we faced with? We're faced with a world which is becoming increasingly interconnected. We're faced with a world which is becoming increasingly interdependent. We should be building bridges, not erecting walls for the future. We're a nation that is a big nation that should be helping to make the rules. We are not a small country looking in from the outside, and leaving the EU will put us at risk in that respect. A small country looking in from the outside whilst the rest of Europe gets itself together and moves its economy and its conditions for its residents onwards. We will lose, I'm absolutely sure, and therefore this is not just an important decision, this is a gamble if we choose to leave the EU.
Brian.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Those of us who wanted this referendum and who want Britain to leave the European Union also want more than anything to restore our democracy. The central issue at stake here is who exactly is in control of our country. Our democracy is simple to understand because every 5 years or so we have an election to decide who governs us. In the European Union there is no vote. The commissioners, I take issue with what my colleague has said here, ultimately run the EU. They're unelected and therefore unaccountable. Successive governments in this country over the past 40 years have promised major reform of the European Union, including our own David Cameron, who set out earlier this year to initiate reform and renegotiate change on our terms of membership of the European Union. Instead, what did he come back with? We were told after lengthy and often fraught meetings in Brussels going on migrant benefits and statements of intent. Well, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, we must assume that the European Union has absolutely no appetite or intention of reform or change. And at a time of significant problems resulting from major population migration across Europe, from Africa, the Middle East and Asia, if ever there was needed a collective strategy from Europe on how to deal with this crisis, the European Union have failed miserably in this task. And instead we've allowed Greece to shoulder many humanitarian situations which are both miserable and wretched. We stood by and watched the German Chancellor create horror scenarios through her lack of judgment of opening the German borders for a period. And now Turkey are seeking to negotiate EU membership in return for border controls and the controls of migrants across Europe. The situation is a complete mess, and after years there's still no cooperation across Europe and within the European Union of what to do next. I turn to immigration. And we should never forget, as my colleagues have said, that immigration has been and continues to be the lifeblood of our great nation. It's provided rich and diverse culture and very useful, important sources of employment in all types of industries and services. Immigrants in the main are diligent, hard-working and loyal, and they pay important taxes like you and me. But frankly, we cannot sustain the sheer numbers who continue to enter the United Kingdom just waving a European passport. And I believe my government, and indeed previous governments, have made serious miscalculation on the actual population numbers of this country. We count people in, but we don't count them out. And our public services, as you well know, and particularly the health service, are at breaking point. In short, I want our elected government to retain control of our borders, to regain control. I want people from across the world to have an equal opportunity to come into this country to live and work, regardless of the colour of their skin, religious beliefs, or in fact where they come from. And it's for this country and the elected government to decide about whom we admit to this country, and not, as I've said, the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. I, and indeed many others, one or two around this table, favour a fair point system based on needs and skills, similar to that in Australia. The free movement of people, the principle of the free movement of people across the European Union is, we're told, non-negotiable. By the way, the European Union is expensive, it's complicated, and it's wasteful, and it's unaccountable. Let me explain. It's expensive. The European Commission employs over 30,000 staff. The European Parliament, 7,500 staff. The European Council, 3,000 staff, all working from within 90 buildings, many equipped with duty-free shops, beauty salons and saunas. There are 751, get your head around that number, of MEPs, each of whom have no powers to initiate, legislate or propose amendments or repeal legislation. And all are exceptionally well paid and enjoyed many different allowances and expenses. Indeed, my friend at the end of the table there, Philip Bushell-Matthews, wrote a book some years ago called The Gravy Train, in which he describes the processing cost in some detail. I urge you to get a copy. It makes a very fascinating read.
Agree with that.
I'll take my commission there. The European Union is wasteful. Do you know, for a month, for every week, for a month in and month out, the entire European Parliament up sticks from Brussels and moves to Strasbourg because the French sensitivity demands a base of EU lawmaking on French soil. The cost of it alone, it's about 80 million euros a year, and so much for the green agenda for moving all around Europe. It's complicated. There are 7 main institutions: the European Council, the Council of Europe, the European Commission, the European Parliament, the Court of Justice, the European Union. I could go on. Anybody can understand how it works and the logic behind it. Well, you're a better person than me because I've looked at it. Perhaps Philip can explain. It's unaccountable. Our taxes provide all this money that goes towards our cost of being a member, and their EU overseas budget. And do you realise that some £3 billion of that is admitted as being lost in corruption? And for 21 years, the European Court of Auditors refused to sign off their accounts. They state that £133 billion of our money, EU budget payments, are affected by material error. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if we ran our government and businesses on a similar error rate, frankly, people responsible would be in jail. There are thousands of regulations on a myriad of topics. Some are sensible, some are completely balmy. But they generally favour the bigger corporations and international businesses who love them because they hurt the small businessman and the start-up new business people. But you know, being back here at the UCB today, which is a world-class educational field in hospitality, tourism and leisure, I discovered there are something like 1,246 EU regulations and directives on bread, 454 on toast, 12,653 on milk, 625 on coffee, 200 on spoons even. And this is not even to mention the bent bananas. In fact, just being serious for a moment, ask Mr. James Dyson, one of our foremost entrepreneurs in this country, the man who makes vacuum cleaners, why he can't put more powerful motors in his vacuum cleaners. I'll tell you why: because of the European Union regulations. I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, the United Kingdom will be better off out of it. Leaving will be a process taking over many months. I don't doubt some of what Sir Albert has said. And I accept it may even provide a short period of economic uncertainty. But ladies and gentlemen, we are strong. Our economy is in better shape than most around Europe. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. We shall flourish further on a global stage, as my colleague has said. And only a vote leave on the 23rd of June will restore control, that is the key word, control, over our democratic future and accountability of those who govern us. and let's move forward for a more prosperous Britain out of the EU. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Let's move to our first question, and I think that's from Dan. Dan, where are you? Over there.
Thank you very much. My question is, how do the wild claims from both the Leave and Remain campaign help to engage young people in this important vote?
Okay, so we've had all sorts of extreme suggestions. We've had comments from David Cameron about World War III effectively breaking out if we left. We've had Boris talking about the number of bananas being limited in the bunches that we buy from the supermarkets. Philip, do you think that this is something that's putting young people off from voting?
I think there are two related parts of the question, if I can try and answer as concisely as I can. One is about the wild claims, and the other is about the engaging of young people. I do think wild claims from both sides have been wild, and I don't think they've helped the debate. I think the comment that is on our little sheet about the wildest of the claims, the World War III from Brexit, David Cameron, I agree that's pretty wild, but the Boris Johnson equivalent isn't, in my view, limiting the number of bananas in a bunch, which, as we know, isn't true, but was actually saying the EU is like Hitler. It's trying to take over all of our country by stealth. That was in the same league, and I think was totally wild. One thing I recommend for everybody, rather than listen to any politicians or even ex-politicians, there is one very good website that I found very helpful, and I've got various little printouts of it here if I'm unable to use them, and that is the BBC Reality Check. Every time anybody from any side or no side makes a claim, the BBC website has got its reality check, headlining lots of issues. I find it remarkably unbiased, remarkably clear, and it's completely independent. So in terms of accessing the facts, I would reckon that's a pretty good source to follow. As far as engaging young people, I think the wild claims are not only disengaging young people, but disengaging old people, disengaging people. And that is a problem. But I also think that young people overall have been too much ignored, to my view. I personally, not in my power to have given it, I personally would have extended the voting age so that more young people have got a chance. Because at the end of the day, it's your future. You're going to be here a little bit longer than some of us. So I think it's a problem. But I think these sort of events, and full marks to this place for putting on this debate, these sort of events are hugely important to you really to get to the facts for yourselves. Let there be more of them, and then you can decide.
Bill, what do you think?
Right. Well, I mean, I think unfortunately it's often the papers that actually pick up the particular claims, and I think the particular one that Boris about Hitler, if you actually listen to what he said, he was actually just talking about historical facts, but they actually picked up on the Hitler one because he mentioned the Hitler name. So it was actually very factual. And the Boris, and about the bent bananas, that was, I mean, it was a joke, but unfortunately we are very much reliant on what the papers pick up and what they actually put out. One of the reasons that I'm actually here and actually talking to you is that I think it's important that you actually do fully understand. I'm out there actually on the stalls, actually talking to people. I'm out there canvassing, I'm out there talking. Because it is important that you understand. You are full of ideology and principles, and it's great. That's the youth. It's marvellous. I'm a bit older. I was there once. I've seen the practicality. I've seen how it's burdensome. And I've actually seen the need to actually leave. I was one of those in 75 that joined the common market. I voted to go in. It was a common market. Nobody told me about the smaller, ever closer union, print. That is the real concern. Who actually controls us? And I want you to be able to control your destiny through your elected people.
Sir Albert, there are, I'm sure politicians occasionally do stretch the truth a little bit, but sometimes it gets extreme. Do you think that that's the case in this particular debate?
Well, it's unfortunate that I think we've had wild claims from both sides, and it is off-putting. off-putting not just to young people, but off-putting to every generation who will go out to vote on the 23rd of June. I would add to what Philip has said, there is another site that you can visit. It's the Electoral Reform Society. They have just opening up a site on better referendum, so that you can go in, you can check facts and figures. In fact, you can go in and look for a meeting that you might be able to attend, or get assistance to bring together a meeting which might deal, therefore, with some of the issues of the referendum. I would hope that young people will go out to vote. The opinion polls seem to indicate that a smaller number, a smaller proportion of young people will be voting. And since, in fact, the impact of this referendum is most likely, whichever way it goes, impact on the long term, it's important that those who are going to be affected by the long term actually have their say. We have to find a way of encouraging a greater proportion of young people to go out to vote, because it's their future. But I am going to condemn as strongly as I can the wild claims, because it's, as with elections often, it's the claims, the wild claims, that put people off voting and don't help democracy one little bit.
Brian, do you think there's a
Chairman,
problem?
I mean, I would agree certainly there. I mean, that what Sir Albert has said is absolutely right. The campaign has sunk to an all-time low, in my opinion, and I must actually include also some of what Boris Johnson's been doing. I don't think it's very clever, and I don't think it's engaging people. A lot of people we've spoken to are absolutely fed up with it. But the very fact that so many of you have turned up today says to me one thing, that you are interested in the future of our country. And I come back to, don't let scaremongering sway your decision. Please go and research. You're all good at researching. You're all good students. I recommend two books. One's written by an MEP, a Conservative MEP as it happens, called Why Vote Leave. It's a really excellent read and very factual. And the other thing, if you have internet access, and I assume you all have that, go and visit and watch Brexit the movie. It's on YouTube, and I'll guarantee you when you've watched it, I think I know which way you'll vote. But the campaign, as far as that's concerned, has sunk to an all-time low. We're all much bigger than that. We're not engaging with young people. So please go out and do your research.
Let me just ask Dan, you asked that question. Do you feel engaged by this debate, or have you been put off by these claims? You're here now.
I think it's all the scaremongering, the facts and extremes being sort of really emphasised. It puts a shadow on all the facts that you need to understand that and how that's going to affect yourself and the people around you. All the wild claims, it does put you off, but if you're interested in it and you know it's important, you will go out and do the research and make a decision. But for maybe the younger demographics, it's a lot more harder, because that's the only things that's shoved in their face, and it would put them off it. So I think it has affected a lot of people.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to another question. Roland, wherever you are, just over here.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My question for the panel is, would John Caldwell's estimate of an 8 billion net gain from Brexit be wiped out by George Osborne's DIY recession?
Brian, I'm going to turn to you first in relation to this. Do you think that that's the case?
I think this is complete tosh. I mean, where does the Chancellor get a DIY recession from? I mean, they can't even forecast the our own country properly. Never mind what's going to happen if we vote to leave the European Union. So certainly, I mean, I don't understand where George Osborne is coming from when he talks about a DIY recession. Would somebody please explain to me? So, do I think the £8 billion worth of gain will be wiped out? No, I don't.
Sir Albert?
Well, the 8 billion, I'm presuming, is our net contribution figure. Express that per capita. There are other countries who, on a per capita basis, who are actually greater net payers than we are. We are a rich country, and I think the infrastructure that we have here is something that we need to see across much of the rest of Europe, and that might mean us all clubbing together, putting our hands in our pockets, so to speak, to ensure that Europe as a whole moves forward in a way which actually opens up the economy of Europe and increases the opportunities for businesses here in the UK. This region, the West Midlands, is, or has been for the last 2 years, the most successful foreign direct investment region of England. We are bringing in more foreign direct investment into the West Midlands than any other region of England. Why? Because we are open for business. But if in fact we're not in the EU, will some of that investment actually come? I doubt it. I honestly doubt it. Now, you don't have to wait for it to happen. You can actually talk to various people at this moment in time who are holding back on decision making because of the uncertainty as to whether we will be in the EU. Being in the EU is an important aspect of that foreign direct investment agenda, because we are a springboard to the rest of Europe in many respects. And take us out of the EU, we will not be that same springboard, which is why I think some people are holding back on investment decisions and therefore putting at risk the future of this economy. I think there will be a downturn in our trade. I'm absolutely sure that the economy of this country is going to suffer. I think George Osborne's right on that. How much it will suffer is one of those issues that you cannot properly predict. But I believe it will suffer. The uncertainty of the present period, I believe, is already having an effect. And therefore, I would want to see that uncertainty removed as quickly as possible. But if you think that that net contribution of just under 8 billion a year is going to then be available to the UK government in order to deal with things that they might want to invest in, well, think again. I do not believe that, in fact, when we seek to put a deal together with the 27 member states, that we will not have to impose the sort of conditions that we are currently having to impose on our on various activities through regulation, etc. And there'll be a cost to that. Speak to Norway. Speak to Norwegians, rather. Speak to other non-member states who have a relationship with the EU. They have to pay for it. We will end up by paying perhaps not quite as much in terms of net payment as we do at the moment, but in order to strike a deal with the EU, if we are removed from the EU, to strike a deal over trade matters, then I do believe that much of that net contribution will continue to be paid to the EU. We'll be outside the club without a say on how the regulations are put together and interpreted, but we'll have to pay notwithstanding.
Bill.
Don't believe in scare stories. The 8 billion is what it currently is. Bear in mind, the cost of Europe is increasing. The net increase has increased by 50% in the last 10 years. We have a rebate. That's due for renegotiation in 2020. That's another £75 million per week that we're going to be giving up, because you can bet your bottom's dollar if we decide to remain in, we ain't going to get that rebate. The costs of bailing out Greece, Portugal, Italy, France, the costs are enormous. That cost is fantastic. I'll tell you why he said a do-it-yourself recession. He was sitting in B&Q. But interestingly, David Cameron, when he was negotiating to get some sort of benefits, so you could come to the electorate, although we actually now know he was actually always intending not to negotiate properly. He was actually saying that in or out, we will prosper. In fact, the Bank of England, or the various reports looking at the growth in the UK is still growing. The Remain say, well, there's this £4,300 deficit by sort of 2030. Well, I would actually challenge that severely. I mean, the idea of actually taking two lots of assumptions, extrapolating them out a number of years, and then actually correlating the difference, I mean, that's just cloud cuckoo land stuff. We're not going to have a recession. Our economy in the UK is growing better than any European country. We've outpaced Germany in the last 4 years. People want to invest in the UK because we're open to business. We trade with the world. We manufacture goods that the world wants to buy. America and Brazil trade with Europe. They don't have any trade negotiations. They don't pay any costs into it. Where's JLR been selling all its goods? It's into China. We haven't got a trade agreement with China. We can't even do a trade agreement with China because we're stuck with the EU. They can't negotiate one. So, come on. We're the fifth largest. We're perfectly able to stand on our own 2 feet. What is this dumbing down of Britain?
Do you think there'll be a net gain or a DIY recession?
Well, you guys decide. I mean, one can argue about the numbers. I don't think you can argue about the facts. The facts are, as Sir Albert said, we get, I think it's 200 billion foreign direct investment into this country. We get that investment because we are seen not just as an open, skilled, English-speaking economy, but because we are a gateway into Europe. If we're not a gateway into Europe, will all that 200 billion disappear? Surely not. Will all of it stay? You decide. I think it's unlikely. Over half the West Midlands exports are car manufacturing. Car manufacturing is also done slightly more cheaply, better or worse, I'm not arguing, in Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, or whatever it's now calling itself, Czechia. They will be very keen to take advantage of us being outside. Will they get more business? I don't know. Are they likely to get less business? You decide. Regarding the budget contribution, all other member states pay into the EU budget. They all believe, whatever you may decide and believe, that they get a net benefit from that, not just in isolation from the money that they paid in, but here, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, which is supposed to be independent, and I believe it is, you may believe otherwise, for every pound we put into the EU, we get almost £10 back. So you need to look at the full picture rather than just the one picture. But the final thing I would just say about trade in general, if I may, and if I may raise the level of intensity and passion a little bit, because I do get angry at some of the fantasies I hear, particularly the allegation, the personal allegation, that I, as an MEP, spent the best 10 years of my life in Brussels and Strasbourg doing nothing because I had no powers. I wouldn't use the word complete tosh for that. I would go somewhat stronger. But I resent that allegation because I went there to serve my region, to serve my country, and to help shape European law. And as far as European law is concerned, all this talk about the EU as if it is an it is a them over there. The EU is us. We make the laws. And although people might say, well, some 60% of the laws are now made in Brussels, they're made in Brussels, but not by Brussels. Recently it was said we can't influence any of the legislation and we have to then abide by it because they decide. The Commission has no votes. It proposes legislation as the civil service, like our civil service does, but that's signed off by the democratic member states, democratic MEPs, shaped by both of them. It is made by us, not by them. And if you look at EU regulation, EU website, my final comment, the BBC website, it says that during my last 5 years there, and I take total credit to this person, of course, it says that of the EU legislation that was made, particularly affecting business, on 97.4% of the legislation, we were on the winning side, we, the UK. So it's not their legislation, it becomes our legislation. It's not them telling us what to do, if anything, but don't tell them, it's us telling them what to do. We can get uptight that we lost out on 2.4% of the legislation. But I think 97.4% of legislation that we embraced, we've initiated, we've shaped, and then chosen to come back here isn't a sign of them telling us what to do. It's us taking control. And we should forget the fantasy and follow the facts.
While we're generally talking about the economy, Emily, I think you've got a specific question.
Hello. What would a vote to leave the EU mean for Birmingham?
I think I'm going to leave Sir Albert to last. We know about his passion for this area. Let me start with Philip on this occasion.
I would like to bow to Sir Albert.
Well, we'll come back to you last of all, if we may.
As I
Brian.
often do.
I think, as my colleague said, I mean, Birmingham is a centre of manufacturing. And as Philip said on the end there, a great deal of car manufacturing and associated businesses emanate in Birmingham. And they're here for a reason. They're here because we have the skills and we have the labour here to do it. And what they don't need trade agreements. They need to. It's not Jaguar Land Rover having trade agreements with China. It's because they're a world-class business and they operate on a global stage. And in my opinion, their businesses, as indeed Birmingham, can only go one way, and that's forward. I picked up a Birmingham Post this morning about 10 minutes before I arrived, and I couldn't help noticing the headline, EU says no to protected status from the Birmingham Balti. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm proud of the Birmingham Balti, and I want that to be sold worldwide, not restricted by some daft European regulation. So there's one reason that, and give me about 3 more hours, I'll think of a few more.
So, Bill, do you think it'll make a difference for Birmingham?
Yes, I do. I think Birmingham will actually grow. We are a great innovating centre. We're a centre of 1,000 trades. This region has actually developed more products, more inventions than any other region, actually, in fairness, in the UK. And what we want is that ability and that freedom to do it, and we will do it. We will do it. I have no doubts about that. The British ability of actually inventing and designing things that the world wants to buy. We're not very good at marketing and selling it. I agree with that. We have an issue. There are issues. But we can develop those products. And we do. And we will. And we'll do better as a result of the Brexit.
Sir Albert.
I've already said, but it's worth repeating, that we are a springboard to the rest of Europe. And if we're not inside, I honestly believe others will view us as a little less of a springboard than we currently are. Now, I can't quantify that. I can't turn that into a fact, if you like. But I believe that much of the investment, much of the foreign direct investment that comes into Britain comes in because we are a member of the European Union. And not being a member of the European Union will start to turn off that foreign direct investment. And if it does happen in that way, because our economy has grown in the West Midlands as a consequence of that FDI, that foreign direct investment. As I said before, 67% of our manufacturing jobs in this region are linked to exports to the EU. I believe that will be affected, adversely affected. I can't quantify it for you, but I believe that will be the case. And we'll lose that in other ways. This might be closer to some of you than perhaps others. Birmingham City Council, just a few weeks back, agreed a 50 million youth employment package. 2/3 of that is European money. The money. 2/3 of that is European money. It comes in because the EU decided they would have a youth employment initiative. The UK got a certain sum of money allocated because of that youth employment initiative. It's matched by European Social Fund spending, and it's matched by whatever Birmingham City Council could put together from its own resources or private or other resources here within Birmingham. That 50 million over 2 years is about putting young people in this city, in this region, back to work. It's an example of how we've been able to work with the EU in putting together programs which are or will be of great help to the residents of the city and the wider region. And I believe that we're able to do that in a way which isn't possible often with a national government, because they operate in a very different way. The structural fund programme that is now in place is not controlled by this city or this region. The government decided it would be centralised. So the European Regional Development Fund programme and the European Social Fund programme is worked out of government departments and not out of, for example, the Greater Birmingham Solihull LEP. We do not control some of these programmes to the extent that we'd want, and it's not because of Europe. It's actually because of our own government's inclination to centralise. Europe actually is a great decentraliser and not a centraliser. And I think we just interpret some of these issues rather wrongly. But go back. I cannot quantify some of these statements. I'm not able to, and nor is anybody else. But I have a firm belief that exit from the EU will be damaging not just to the UK, it will be extremely damaging to this city and to this region.
Let's move on now to the questions of migration, immigration, human rights, those sorts of things. And we'll take two questions together, if we may. Ajana, you have a question for us. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I've got a question. The question is EU membership essential in an unsecure world?
Thank you. And Gugu. Gugu? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. If the EU has led the way to no tax avoidance, women's rights, and human rights, why would we vote to leave?
Okay. So questions on EU membership in an unsecure world and questions about the EU leading on human rights and such things. Bill.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the UK that's led on human rights long before we remember the EU. So it is actually the UK that leads on those strongly, and in or out, that's where we are. So that isn't an issue. Is EU membership essential in an unsecure world? No. It's NATO that's kept the peace. It's not the European Union. In fact, actually, there is a real danger with the European Union, and I don't want to. Well, maybe I should back off. But it's quite interesting over the Ukraine issue. It was NATO brought Ukraine into NATO very sensibly. Without that, the Russians would have actually invaded Ukraine, and they would have invaded Ukraine because the EU were overzealous in trying to get Ukraine to become another member of the European Union. Wars actually come about through unelected
as Sir Albert said earlier, not to build walls but build bridges. I think the more we stand stronger is when we are in as much as possible cohesion with our allies. So is it essential? well, how do you define essential? But if it's, in my view, highly desirable and highly sensible, an alternative is very unclear. And as far as human rights and other rights are concerned, maybe we have led in certain areas, but in terms of legislation of workers' rights, equal opportunities, gender pay, etc., that has come through EU legislation, which we have accepted, so it's now part of our legislation. All this talk about we will be free from regulation, I haven't yet heard of any regulation that the Leave side would actually repeal. I'm afraid it's bluff and bluster.
No.
Yes. And in answer to your question, absolutely right. Those rights are entrenched in EU law, which we have supported, we have embraced, and I would hope that whatever happens, we will keep them because they're important rights.
Brian.
Well, I come back and the basis of my argument to leave is all about control. Who is controlling our country? I want our elected Prime Minister to go out and negotiate our security in the world through our membership of NATO. My colleague is quite right. It is NATO that's kept peace in the world and in Europe, not the European Union. And if somebody would like to explain why they think the European Union has, I'd like to challenge them. So it is about control. And when in the bigger world, when we talk about Brazil and Russia and all these big countries, I want our elected government. We're big enough to go out and negotiate our own agreements and our own security.
Thank you. Sir Albert?
If we were having this conversation some 20 or so years ago, the one thing that would not be in doubt is that the EU has helped bring peace and prosperity to Europe. It would not be something we doubted. Yes, we've had recent wars in Central Europe and very sad abuses of human rights.
Terrible.
But that, I believe, will not now be possible because most of those member states are either in or will be over a period of time in the EU. And therefore, we have done what I think our forefathers were looking to do, bring peace and prosperity to a wider Europe through the European Union. But the issue of human rights, fundamental rights, I was involved in that debate some 10 years or so ago. It was said earlier, I sit on a European Committee of the Regions, which is the local and regional government conduit, if you like, between local and regional government across Europe and the Commission and the European Parliament. And I was involved in the debate on the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Who did I have difficulty with in taking a view, an opinion, as they call it, forward on the Charter of Fundamental Rights? Not my colleagues across the other member states, but my colleagues here in this country, who did not want to see the Charter for Fundamental Rights incorporating some of those rights that I believed it should. And Philip is correct. This legislation comes through, it's proposed, but it's signed off by member states and now increasingly by the European Parliament under joint decision-making agreements. And this country has chosen to adopt, therefore, a convention around human rights as a result of that legislation coming through those European processes. I think we've got much to be thankful for the way that has worked in delivering packages of human rights, which I believe would not have been delivered had we simply been reliant on the House of Commons to put something similar in place.
We have time for one final question. Jodie, where are you? Thank you.
This has already been alluded to by the panel already, but you were talking about the complications of negotiating a Brexit. But before we even get to that point, sorry, if the public were to vote to leave, and given that members of the Conservative Party are at complete opposites on this decision themselves, what type of Tory party will actually emerge from this to negotiate the terms of a Brexit?
Sir Albert, I'm going to ask you first.
Well, he's Labour.
as a Labour former leader of the council, I wonder whether you have a view in relation to
I'm sure he has a view.
Well, I think it's rather unfortunate the Conservative Party have got themselves into this position. I believe that David Cameron was looking to try and deal with the problem he had in relation to UKIP, made some promises, and we've now got a referendum where some of that referendum is being dictated by the UKIP agenda and not by an agenda set by ourselves. It's going to be for the Conservative Party to find a way of healing the wounds. I'm not going to I'm not going to take sides in this one. I shall be an observer of the scene.
Excellent.
But I do think the problems have come about because of trying to appease UKIP, or those members in the Conservative Party who saw UKIP as more of a threat than they actually were.
Brian, briefly.
Well, as chairman of a Conservative association with over 1,000 members, I can tell you there is no appetite for a leadership challenge or an election. So that is a fabrication from the Daily Mirror and other left-wing newspapers who they love to see Boris and David Cameron going hard at it. And why shouldn't they? But it doesn't mean to say we're going to have a leadership election. And I'm quite happy on the 24th of June, whatever the result, and I will stand by the referendum like most people on this panel and respect the decision that the people of this country make. And I will get behind, once again, our leader, David Cameron.
Philip, did you want to?
Well, nothing much to add. I mean, it's true that the party is divided. Clearly, the country is divided, but it's more obvious for the Conservatives being the largest party, and also, not trying to make a point, I mean, the broadest church, if you like. The larger the party you are, the more people you get on wider extremes, if you like. But I'm delighted we're having a referendum. I think it's an issue that needs to be resolved. We need to be resolved for certainty for a good slug of time, because we don't want to keep on going back to this. I would hope that when it comes to a vote, all of you will vote whichever way you vote, because I think we want it to be a high turnout and a decisive result, so that we can all get on with our lives and get on with our future, but more particularly, you can get on with yours.
Okay.
One final one.
Right, okay. Now, I think on the negotiations, I wouldn't be at all surprised, actually, if it isn't a cross-party negotiating team. I'm not a political person. I don't stand for a political party. I'm not a member of any political party. It is across all parties, this debate. And interestingly, it's when you talk to individuals, it's split families, it's splitting generations. It is, there is a wide, diverse view out there. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if actually the negotiating team is a cross-party one. It would be good to be one. And I think that would really help.
Thank you. You've now heard all of those parts of our debate. I would be very interested, and I suspect the panel would as well, to see if you've changed your mind. All I'm asking you to do is to show your hand.
Can we make a closing statement? Or?
I suspect that there probably isn't time for that. Sorry about that.
A very quick one.
So,
I'd love to do it. I've prepared one.
Sorry, Brian, I think.
If people feel happy to stay for 5 minutes...
Got time for another quick summary?
Okay, let's go to the vote.
Yes.
There was a vote to leave up at the top.
I'm sure our panel members might be available for a few minutes afterwards to speak to one or two of you if you want to do that. But I would be very interested, as the panel would, I think, in whether you've changed your mind as a result of this debate. So whether that's that you've now decided to vote, or you've changed your mind as to which way you're going to vote. If you have changed your mind in any way, could you please show now?
They're reluctant to show on a change of votes.
There's a small, it's a slightly bigger number. There's a few people over here. So there's a number of you who've changed minds as a result of this, and I don't know which way you've changed. I'm not going to ask that question of you. But thank you all. Thank you to our speakers today.